Using its Oasis box, Bondh-e-Shams has provided approximately 80 million cups of clean water to water-starved, water-scarce communities in Pakistan, Yemen, South Sudan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. Bondh-e-Shams leverages the power of smart tech and renewable energy to fight the global water crisis. Bondh-e-Shams has received multiple international awards since 2014, including the Forbes 30 Under 30 Award in 2018, the Princess Diana Award in 2019, in addition to receiving national media recognition across Pakistan during the flood crisis of 2022 in Pakistan. 53,000 Pakistani children under 5 die annually from diarrhea due to poor water and sanitation. An estimated 70% of households in Pakistan still drink bacterially infected water. So today we have the CEO of Bondh-e-Shams with us, Hamza Farooq. Welcome, Hamza. So please tell us a little bit about your vision and which communities does this project aim to target, and what is basically your vision? What are you trying to do with Bondh-e-Shams?
Sure. Thank you for phrasing the question in that macro sense. Look, I grew up in Pakistan, until the age of 18, and then had the chance to study abroad at Williams College, then at the University of Oxford, and I've been working in Goldman for the last 8 years. And I think what that showed me, and I think what stood out to me, was the difference in privilege, right? The privilege gap. Mm-hmm. Between what we get used to when we're living outside of Pakistan, mm-hmm. And the reality on the ground in Pakistan. I think what the picture you've painted of thousands of children dying every year, I could have been one of them. Right? Mm-hmm. We were all exposed to contaminated water growing up. So we have to recognize our fortune by the time we have gotten an opportunity to leverage higher privilege. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, the vision initially for myself was this notion of service to the country. Mm-hmm. Right? I think there are a lot of millions of people in Pakistan who grew up with this sense कि मुल्क के लिए कुछ करना है. And for me, I think that was a very real thing as well. And I think it's very easy and comfortable once you're abroad to stay abroad and to leverage your education and turn it into cash. And that's fine. And I think there's nothing wrong with it. Mm-hmm. But so long as you don't become part of this vicious cycle of brain drain, right? I remember giving a small radio show in 2012 on brain drain and how it was detrimental to the country. And I was just glad that I wasn't part of the numbers and the statistics. Mm-hmm. So the vision for Bondh-e-Shams initially was a personal vision. It was a vision to say, I am going to leverage what I have learned and apply that to uplift and help empower communities in Pakistan. Initially, I wasn't even talking about Pakistan. I was talking about Chakwal and Jud, the the village where I grew up. Right. So Bondh-e-Shams became a way for me to bring clean water to my village that did not have clean water. And it was in the aftermath of the first project that we realized that we were hitting multiple issues within the community by one intervention. Right? By getting access to clean water, we were circumventing the energy crisis in Pakistan, 2013, 2014, where you did not have electricity for, half the day, more than that sometimes. In rural areas, often the entire day. So the infrastructure had to be solar powered. So fine, here was a cool intervention that could go around off-grid communities. Then you're cleaning water by using filtration. And as soon as that happens, the first folks in the community to get impacted are the women, right? Who are often tasked with collecting water, are the children who skip out on school because they must go either work in the field, right? And I think for folks abroad, it might seem like these grand notions. In Pakistan, it's a very real thing. We know who these people are. Many of them are service workers within our own communities and their families back home. So what we realized, and I'd love to have hard data to back this, but any macro study must be, take on a number of years. But anecdotally, we saw children were going back to school. We saw the incidence of disease gradually come down because, as you know, much of the disease in Pakistan is actually water-related: diarrhea, cholera, typhoid. So, to me, that became an intervention which was worth replicating. And since then, I've just put in the energy and the effort with the team in Pakistan to take from that one community. Alhamdulillah, last weekend we delivered our 101st project, right, which is a big intervention. And the idea around this, and I think just to summarize this vision part of it, once I'd accomplished my personal vision, the idea was there are 1.2 billion people around the world that lack access to clean water. 20 million people in Pakistan, right, that lack access to clean water, 1 in 10. So can this project be scaled nationally and then internationally? And everything we've done at Bondh-e-Shams, from setting up the team to our own manufacturing plant in Pakistan, to building the device, the OSS box. It's done in a very design thinking driven way to be able to install these projects rapidly. My first critical moment of pausing and reinventing was when I did the first project and realized it took us almost a month to install one clean water project, right? If you really wanted to bring this clean water project to 20 million people, you could not follow the conventional method. At max, you would do, even if you're great and big organization, maybe you can do 4 projects a month, right? Maybe that's 50 projects a year.
Interesting.
But if you really want to tackle 20 million people, it has to be scalable. So, and I can share this with you with confidence because we've done it twice. Last weekend, in one weekend, we deployed 10 projects. The weekend before, we deployed 10.
Which area was that again?
So this was Balochistan. So we've done a lot of work in around hub in Bela, Balochistan, and I invite any listener to come and visit us as well. But that's been the construct. Leverage solar power, make it highly scalable, make it extremely transparent, because we don't want funding to going left, right, and center. I come from a very methodical, design thinking, statistics driven, data driven background. So we've installed also a device within the box which measures the quality, quantity, the geolocation of these projects. So when we invest in this infrastructure, it isn't for Hamza Farooq, it's not for Bondh-e-Shams. It's for these communities, and we're happy for you to go and verify that transparently yourself.
Right. That's amazing. Sounds amazing. Really, you've been able to really synergize a lot of your own personal portfolio in this project. So what has been the response of the community so far that you've been working in? Whether there was a spirit of social mobilization there that you witnessed, and also what has been the response of the government, especially the provincial governments, if there's any response at all?
So, great question. I think at the community level, we've been welcomed with open arms.
Right.
I think, and I have to say this openly, sitting in Punjab and growing up in Punjab, there was often this sense that breaking out of the shell of Punjab is sometimes difficult because you get stuck within the confines of what is comfortable. Okay. And when I talk about that, what I really mean is we can think of Pakistan and the lack of privilege and the infrastructure, lack of infrastructure we have in Pakistan versus abroad. And, you talk about the UK and the US, it's fine. If you look within the country, you have the same level of disparity between Punjab and Sindh, Punjab and Balochistan, Punjab and KPK.
Rightfully so.
And, we understand that, 60%, large part of our population sits within Punjab. That's where the power center is. I get it. But if we remain this divided amongst the provinces, then you can't really have social mobility. You can't really have national human rights progress, right? So it must be done. And so when I talk about that, what I really mean is I struggle with the same sense as well. The first 10, 15 projects were all in Punjab because it was really difficult to break out of the current infrastructure, right? You can't find contractors, right? You can't find people who will trust you. You almost have this sense of, I'm not sure what the security infrastructure is going to be when I travel from Karachi 10 hours south, north into the country, either way. And eventually we just broke free and we said, you know what? The work that is needed, the images that we see of people really struggling for access to clean water, they're in Sindh and they're in Balochistan. In Sindh, because the government has funded pipelines that go to these remote communities that fund, that put water in these massive ponds that are open air ponds that are massively contaminated. In Balochistan, there's not even that. So there's small subsets of communities that are reliant on small wells and ponds, and everywhere we've met, everywhere we've gone to KPK, we've gone to Lucky Marwat, we've gone to Hub, Bela, we've gone to Umarkot, Thar, we've been received with open arms. Because people in these communities have a strong sense of what is missing. Right? These aren't top-down solutions. This isn't a policy solution. I'm not a politician, I'm not a policy maker. Our work was speaking with the communities, surveying them, understanding what it is that they needed, and then designing a solution and getting it to them. And what you need for that, in all honesty, is a backing of the community itself,
right?
The willingness of the team that is going to do the work, right? And a product that can answer these multitude of problems at the same time. Now, what I would love for to have happened in these years is the Pakistani government coalesces around us as well, right? Incubates this idea and says, why is this guy getting a Forbes 30 and a 30 and the Princess Diana Award and the Points of Light Award from Her Majesty the Queen, which was handed to me by Her Majesty's sort of ambassador here in Pakistan. Why aren't we coalescing around this idea? Right? I would love to see that. I think we're yet to see that level of recognition in Pakistan. The exception to this is the national media. And I think that requires applauding as well, because as a young entrepreneur and as a young Pakistani, the first attraction that I had was actually to go to the ministries, right? Hit up anybody I could, explore our network, the teachers and the professors. Do you know ex-politician? Do you know ex-minister? Can you get us a meeting? And we got through, I met with 3 or 4 different ministers. We had those sittings, and I won't name them here. But none of those conversations bore any fruit.
Right.
And I think my general sense around that was our incentives weren't aligned. And it's a tough one to swallow, but I don't think their short-term incentives are aligned with the long-term progressive thinking that the country needs.
Right.
Right. So what you're trying to solve for is this remote community in Sindh for a politician sitting in Islamabad. Maybe they don't understand, maybe they don't care. I'm not sure. But the reality of it was that we struggled with it. And we eventually realized that we weren't going to get the kind of support we needed. So eventually what we really, really need, and this would help scale Bondh-e-Shams from 100 projects that have been proven to maybe 1,000. And my estimate is we need 10,000 of these projects in Pakistan and I say this with a certain level of confidence because we've done it, to end Pakistan's water crisis. Right? Now, this is not one NGO's prerogative. This is a national policy framework that is needed around countries, protecting the country's water resources. It will involve, and IPRI wrote a very nice piece I read yesterday on the Indus Water Treaty, the legal implications of that. How do we take care of our rivers? How do you place, and this is shocking probably to some listeners, Pakistan is probably one of the few countries in which access to groundwater is free. Right? So you have hundreds of these small companies that have come up that are just extracting water for free because the only investment you need is the capital infrastructure to draw the water out.
Right.
Why are we letting these countries do that? When Pakistan is the 4th, 5th most water scarce country in the world. Right? So there's a national level reimagination of what is needed. And I will also, and this is the point I will end this note on, what you really need is to leverage technological infrastructure to make data-driven exercises. It is much easier said than done, and I totally understand that. But that is the job of a policymaker, right? It's not easy. And to the extent that Bondh-e-Shams offers any kind of example, the device that I alluded to earlier, this remote monitoring device, that is what is needed. Place that at every water source, measure how much water is being taken out, the quality of that water, use data mapping, water mapping and geologging to drive your decision making because again, we're talking about 220 million people that rely on you.
Depending upon your extensive experience, like you said, from project design to implementation and also monitoring of the project, do you think you can come up with a few actionable recommendations for the government that this is exactly what you have to do on priority basis at least to make sure that Pakistan does not enter into a huge water crisis in near future?
Look, I think...
Where does the focus have to be really?
So I think the important thing is understanding that whenever there is going to be a water crisis, and we had the drought in Cholistan last year, we had the floods. Whenever those crises happen, they will inevitably and predominantly impact the last mile communities, the villages, right? So the first question is, how do you get amazing data that maps that for you?
Need assessment, yeah.
And I think there are a lot of really good initiatives in Pakistan, right? I think Pak Launch, I'll mention one, during the floods became a great data-driven way of bringing attention to what was needed, when it was needed. And, I will say we're a very innovative and entrepreneurial country in many ways. I think many authors have written about, strong sort of society, weak state. I think we can break free from that. Even the state can be very helpful when it's needed.
Right.
But the issue has been, and I say this again, so number one, great data. Number two, spending time with those communities, designing solutions that work for them. Number three, understanding, and this is what we've done at the moment, is understanding that you cannot solve the problems of today and the future by using the tools of the past.
Right.
And I think we've said this multiple times. You have to break free from this thinking that the only way to clean water is using reverse osmosis is simply not true. For those who know, nanotechnology is the way forward. For those who know, 60 to 70% of the water crisis in Pakistan is bacterial. It's not chemical. When you
Right.
talk about bacterial crisis, what you need to remove are the bacteria. It's very simple. And you don't need reverse osmosis for that, which, by the way, runs you $15,000, $20,000, right? Small ultra-filter based plants. Again, this is a step up from hand pumps, a step down from reverse osmosis. This is what Bondh-e-Shams is developing. We are not trying to say that we can desalinate the water. There are many people who've tried to draw us into this commercial way of approaching it, saying, why don't you clean the water in Karachi and give it and sell it for X, Y, and Z. It's not what we're doing. The idea is you've got communities that are reliant on water which is bacterial contaminated. So there is a middle ground there. So create data, design solutions that make sense. Number 3 is embedding those solutions with technology to get even better data. Again, what we've already developed. And number 4 would be then, and I think once you have that is when you go out and say, we have a great development project. Can X, Y, and Z fund it? Because Pakistan needs to be a climate resilient country. So we're great at going out and pitching. We've done that multiple times, but at certain point, you start losing credibility because, funds keep coming in and not getting deployed to the right resources. And, whatever hard goods you get end up getting sold. So.
Right, that's very nicely summed up. So we're all aware of the lack of budgetary focus of Pakistan government to these issues and also the lack of capacity that we have now because of our economic situation. How do you look at the funding requirements of organizations like yourself? Because obviously you're in the network also in the field. Do you think that the right response comes from sometimes other donors like international donor organizations, corporate sector, private sector?
So great question. And I think I'll take a step back and say the following. There's often not a single solution to the problems that we're facing within the nonprofit sector, even within the corporate sector. So I would be very hesitant to say one policy recommendation that would apply to us. What I would say is what would have been extremely helpful from the outset. Now we've broken through to some barriers, and I'm lucky and fortunate to be here and talking in a policy setting. There are hundreds and thousands of other initiatives that do not get the same level of focus, right? And we've broken through because, alhamdulillah, I had the backing and I had sort of, this awareness of how to push through. And I had access to some funding as well. So what would have been extremely helpful is when policymakers, and I'm sure everybody watches ARY and national media, when you see a project like this, reach out, have a conversation. Let's sit down and figure out if we can find a path forward. I will say we've met with the ministries, we've met with the Pakistan Poverty Elevation Fund, we've met with Benazir Income Support Program. And I name these institutions not to name or shame, just to say that we've tried our best. And as a young entrepreneur, again, right, like I was 24, 23 when I was starting this work. I'm not supposed to know the answers. Why should I know who to tap for the right resource?
Right.
You're sitting in the government infrastructure. You're the bureaucracy. You're the establishment.
That's the government's responsibility, welfare is,
And, find projects like this. Maybe set up a ministry that is meant to energize young folks, right? And, there's the Kamyab Jawan program and whatnot. But clearly it's missing, a large piece of what is needed. And I think part of that understanding is that we need to be very vigilant about the kind of policy that are needed from a macro landscape. So, since 2011 and, since OBL, basically the struggle for a lot of nonprofits has been no infrastructure to be able, that can be leveraged to open bank accounts.
Right.
Getting work done, right? And we're all well aware of that. Well, the government was quick to shut it down, but what was the replacement? What was the alternative, right? When we talk about, for instance, Afghanistan, we were certainly very well aware, the US should not sanction it because it will stop all aid. But that's what you did in Pakistan.
Right.
By installing one policy that shut down all these organizations. And of course, there were gaps that needed to be filled. And we understand. Maybe if it was an emergency that was needed to be there for a couple of years, maybe 6 months. But, 12, 13 years in, where's the response? And I say this because we struggled to set up a local nonprofit for 7 years. That's how long it took us.
Wow.
Because we kept being shown different paths
on
what was needed. Eventually, we realized what needed to do. And now, alhamdulillah, we are registered locally. But that is, and I share this because it diffuses the energy.
Right. Oh, that's very well said. Yeah.
Right. So if I'm having to spend time researching which Section 42 I need, or which society's 1860 Act do I need.
All these bureaucratic hurdles. Yeah.
And I've genuinely had Harvard-educated lawyers help me on this, and they even couldn't open it.
And how many entrepreneurs in Pakistan have that privilege?
That's what I'm saying. So there was one blog post that I found in 2016, 2017 that helped guide me a bit. So this is, and again, the responsibility is not on me.
Yeah.
I'm not sitting in the halls of power, right? There's a big power parity, as you phrased it earlier.
Right.
So for those in power, help us, guide us, right? That's what your job is. So I'm not asking you to go above and beyond. That is literally what your job is. Right. So, we're here. Again, we understand. Again, I always love to take a step back. So forget Bondh-e-Shams for a second. Forget this non-profit sector for a second. You've got a country where 40 to 60% of the population is young, energetic. And at the same time, we're talking about a productivity gap.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So how do you bridge the resource you have with the problem that you see? Again, take a step back even further from that. Why do we need to solve that? You've got a balance of trade problem. You've got a balance of payments problem. You've got a current account which is going to be depleted very quickly. Right. You're talking about foreign reserves that are less than 1 month's worth of import.
Indeed. Yeah.
Right. And that balance, again, we're too fixated, for instance, on the textile sector, which has been a great pillar of strength for Pakistan, for the last 75 years. But will it also be this pillar of strength for Pakistan for the next 75? And why should it be when the world is moving very quickly? And again, we have to understand that it is not a zero-sum game.
Right.
Instead of splitting the pie into multiple pieces, what we're saying is grow the pie.
Yeah.
The way to grow the pie is to support the textile sector. At the same time, understand that IT, for instance, right? And we generally have a sense, we love this word because IT, for instance, in Pakistan brought almost 3 billion worth of sort of exports in Pakistan last year. In India, it was 160 billion, right? So we're talking 50 times higher for a country population which is 5 times higher, right? So, or 6 times higher. So why is that happening? And we understand that, of course, we may have lost, and I love to phrase it this way because we may have lost the war with India around IT for the last decade. And I love to phrase it this way because there's nothing wrong with challenging folks in your region for the right kind of metrics. Let's be competitive about development. Let's be competitive about climate. Let's be competitive about our economies. Let's not only be competitive with the border, right? So, and I say this because, I say this because what has happened in the last 10 years is not necessarily indicative of what needs to happen in the next 10 years. The folks who were making telephones were out of jobs soon as the cell phone came. So next 10 years are not going to be the same kind of IT. The world is very quickly evolving to the AI space, and Pakistan has tons of resource to offer to that.
Amza, do tell us, because you have exposure of a much more developed state than Pakistan, that is the US. How do you think the non-governmental organization based projects like your project can be more connected or more in line with the government's budgetary focus, government's alignment, its policy goals? Particularly Pakistan's national security policy at least says that it is going to be more centered on human security. So jo in dono ke beech ka gap hai, how do you think, what kind of mechanisms do you think can be in place to make sure this gap is reduced? Because as you said, and many of our other speakers have also mentioned, there's a huge gap.
Yes. So the way I see it is, the struggle with Pakistan's what I like to call the central nervous system of the country, where the decisions need to be made, the CPU. The struggle with it is you're getting a CPU reinstalled every 3 months, or at maximum twice, right? That's happened every 5 years. When that happens, it erases the entire institutional memory. The exception to this is either the non-profit development sector, which is there for the long term.
Right.
It is also, sometimes the corporates that are there for a long term understand the similar challenges. So leverage this sector to your own development goals, right?
Well said.
If you have a government-branded, government-run scheme, which is, branded under your Supremo, as the Benazir Income Support Program, or X, Y, and Z, and Kamyab Jawan under PTI, that will be the first target when the new CPU is installed. So don't do that. If you truly care about these causes, set up something. And again, the ISAS program was applauded the world over. But at the same time, unfortunately, it was also quite politicized.
Right.
We need to separate human development from the politics. You cannot have...
Interesting.
You must not focus on finding great politicians. You must focus on finding great policy makers.
Well said.
Right? Because being a politician is almost a career in Pakistan.
Right.
So policy making
Well
is not a
spotted.
career, and that
Yeah.
can be a career. So I think the development sector, if aligned well with the core responsibilities of the government that is meant to deliver on that mandate,
Of course, yeah.
right, can be a great pillar of strength because you can pass on the resources to well-developed, well-functioning, strong, structured organizations, that are aligned with the national focus and national security, and then empower them, incentivize them, and get out of the way. I don't think the U.S. government does roundtable with nonprofits. All it does is set the right policies that empower. So there's a certain amount of tax incentivization that happens for the nonprofit sector in the US, for instance. You're not meant to pay any taxes so long as you donate that money. Similar could be done in Pakistan, but again, in Pakistan, nobody's paying taxes anyways. So there's another problem. So I think there's a conversation that needs to be had in that space to incentivize the right policies. And I think the final thing I would really add here is there's, again, no quick fix to this.
Right.
The focus for the entire country and for every one of us should be plugging the gap in our economy, understanding and pushing policies that will help increase the exports, reduce the imports, prop our sectors. Again, I give one more example. We pride ourselves on hospitality. We pride ourselves on services. Why can't we have a services-driven export sector? And what I mean by that is not necessarily exporting people. What I mean is structuring it in a way that government sponsors, such as the hospitality sector, as a service for folks abroad, and then those folks, send structured remittances back. So remittances remain a pillar of strength.
Interesting.
And if you think of it from that perspective, when you talk about the 7.6 million Pakistanis abroad that send remittance back, I think we get lost in the weeds sometimes. We think of it as some small subset. If you look at the citywide population in Pakistan, you take away the 10 top cities, leave, Rawalpindi, Karachi, Faisalabad, and Lahore. After the 11th country, 7.6 million equals the next 30 countries together. 30 cities together. Right? Your average city population, after the 10th one is maybe 300, 400,000. 7.6 million divided by 300, 400,000 is 25, 30 cities. So you're talking about 30 cities that you've disenfranchised, that you also want to send you billions of dollars of remittances. So let's give them the power to vote. Let's empower them, and let's think holistically.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably how, and again, there's no quick fix. So long as we're focused, so long as we understand what the national priority is, so long as we're not, focused on the politics of it and more on the implementation of it, there are these great answers. And again, Pakistan is not the exception to these rules. You cannot have a successful country without a well-functioning government.
Right.
You cannot have success without political security and physical security, national security, and all government infrastructures. Bureaucracy needs to add to that. So, I think we've got a very bright future with the right hope. But again, I leave it to the experts to get us there.
Thank you. That was very well explained. Thank you so much, Hamza, for your time. Again, remarkable work that is being done under Bondh-e-Shams for communities that really, really need it. Thank you very much, everyone. This is me, Nurulan, signing off from IPRI.